I'm probably going to show my age with this story, but I think it will be good to finally get this down somewhere. I could never type this back at home for reasons that I think are obvious. So, for any dumb mistakes, I'm sorry, as I am Chinese if that does not become clear to you already. Back in 1998 or so, I was in the Guizhou province at a listening post, is what I think you would call it. I was a translator who would translate English to Mandarin, although at the time, my English was pretty rough and was barely passable. I think it's called SIGINT here. Signal intelligence is what I managed to look up. How it works is we would basically be trying to intercept transmissions from other countries. It was a big operation of radio networks running to catch military and diplomatic communications, and the US has these too. Soviets also have them. At the time, these were run under the PLA, People's Liberation Army, and my unit was number 61046. We used shortwave radios and spectrum analyzers, and we had a pile of sheets of paper to note everything down on. Computers were a bit too expensive to have in these remote mountain places all the time. The equipment that we had was kind of old and not good standard, but we worked hard. It was cold in the bunker, and we had to be quiet and listen all day. I would hear from Vietnam and Chinese Navy, and even NATO and Soviet. We picked up all kinds of chatter, from boring to useful. Anyway, one day we started receiving some kind of emergency transmission, and it is coming from one of our own frequencies. It's on our emergency frequency, and this woman's voice comes on. It sounds like a person and not a robot speech thing that they use. She came on, and for the next 5 minutes, she read out numbers. I wrote them all down on the paper. Everyone did. It was just long unbroken strings of numbers and letters like 02-4517-223-GZ-88417-A 61046-1198-77, stuff like that. We didn't catch it at first, but when she started adding the letters on each time, we realized what it is. She was listing personnel IDs. It's not like now, where they just use national ID. The PLA had their own internal numbers. She kept listing, and we could match these numbers and letters to the people working there. She said my own ID, and I got scared, like really scared. I didn't know how she knew this. She said some IDs that didn't match anyone in the place. She said some IDs of people who passed or stopped working here. Once the transmission stopped, we broke the silence, and we got shouted at for not being quiet. We were all worried about an information leak or something bad happening. It was our own frequency though, so superiors told us it did not matter. This kept on happening. That first day, every single one was listed, but after that, every day, she would only read out one. She would read one person's ID, for example, and then start to list Morse code. One of my friends, she read his ID, and then listed Morse code, which spelled out home. He did not come in the next day. We found out that his house got broken into, and my friend was beaten up pretty badly. It was scary, but we did not immediately connect it to the transmission. It only happened 2 more times before we traced it and stopped it. A few days later, they read out another ID, and the Morse code just said, workplace. The ID was of this technician, and he would repair all of the equipment. Nobody thought anything of it, until it was almost time to finish, and no one had heard from him most of the day. Me and one guy who works as a guard went down to his workshop to check on him. It wasn't an actual workshop, just a tiny little basement room where he would work on junk. We found him. He was slumped over in his chair. We rushed over and tried to shake him, but he was not responding. We called for medical attention, but it did not matter. He was dead. They said he touched or cut into a live wire when working on an old capacitor or something. It wasn't grounded correctly, and because of the high voltage, it zapped him and killed him on the spot. No one could believe it. He had burn marks on his hands and fingers, and one on his neck. They said the current went straight through him. His body got sent away, and it did not get reported except to his family. They were distraught, but superiors said it was his fault since he was the expert. By now, the deaths did not seem like a coincidence anymore. We had people tracking the transmission, and it did not take long. It was coming up from an old mountain compound nearby. They didn't think it was in use anymore, but it seemed so. The transmission came in again the next day, and a unit was already en route. The woman on the radio, she read my ID number this time. Once I heard enough digits to realize that it was mine, I started shivering and shaking. I did not want to die. She finished reading the ID, and in the middle of the Morse code, she stopped. She started screaming and begging for help. She had only gotten to spelling WA when she started screaming out that they were going to kill her if she did not keep reading. I heard her voice get quieter as she was pulled away from the microphone. Following this was a scream, and then just static. I was horrified and was still on the edge all day, thinking I was going to die. I didn't know what WA was going to spell, so anything could happen to me. We got a report later that day that the unit got there. The place was all sealed up and dusty and abandoned. They found destroyed equipment and signs that people had been there, but not in many years. They never found the trace of a woman or any other people being there that day or that week. I didn't die, obviously, since I typed this. I don't know what happened or what was going to happen. I don't know if she saved my life or how she was even connected. I just hope that it was a really scary coincidence and not anything more sinister that we don't understand. My grandparents risked their lives immigrating to the United States in the 60s to escape persecution by the communists. My entire family jokes about how my grandmother has always been some kind of Buddhist sage, but my grandfather has always been more Western. I recently went to visit them. As their favorite grandchild, and the only one able to speak Chinese, the whole family has agreed that they would pass down the stories and some family secrets onto me. It's not like my idiot cousins care about them, and my brother is busy with college. As an avid ex-looker, I thought it would be appropriate to post a very creepy story that my grandfather shared with me. I won't be sharing any family secrets or anything. That's for me to keep to myself. However, I will be providing all of you with enough information to understand the context of the situation that they were in. It's a bit of a long one, and it's a little far-fetched, but I will be writing this in a way that makes sense to all of you. This is the one that's always stuck, and we have never had any answers for it. I will try as best as I can not to dramatize it or add anything unnecessary. My grandfather was the youngest son of a doctor in a rural farming village in Fujian. For the purposes of the story, I will call him by the Christian name that he took, Justin. The terrain here was and is still dense with forests and tall grass, and the air was humid and thick. His village was tucked between several large hills and cut between mountains that stretched upwards into great green spires. This was a time of great political strife. Dispersed fighting between warlords and rivaling political factions dragged every person into the conflicts. He, being a young boy, was expected to secretly deliver messages for the burgeoning communist forces in the region. Please do not judge him for this. It was a very different time, and the factions were constantly at odds. He simply had to make certain choices. He would make the journey from his village to the neighboring village, where older communist students and teachers had established a clandestine base of operations, which was probably about 15 or 20 kilometers out by bicycle. This trek took him through perilous terrain on questionable trails over a swampy forest. He would often make these treks alone in the dead of the night, but sometimes he would be accompanied by an older, teenage student for his own protection. We are going to call him Wang. Justin never really liked Wang. He was from a dirt poor family of rice pickers, and his only real goal in coming with him would be to have a chance at killing a tiger or a Republican soldier with his bamboo spear, which he waved around all the time. Even to young Justin, Wang seemed like a moronic child. He would bark orders at Justin and make too much noise, and he was always afraid that Wang would attract attention. Wang was essentially the old Chinese version of that kid in high school who always wore camo everywhere. On a very foggy evening, Justin was tasked with delivering a large, red envelope to the next town over, like he usually would be. He was not to open this envelope under penalty of death. The moon was dim that night, and the teachers who tasked him with the transportation knew it would give him better cover. He met Wang at the edge of the forest as the sun set, his straw hat obscuring his pockmarked face. "What took you so long, Justin? You realize that this is a very important mission, yes? You have to remember to be on time." Justin rolled his eyes. There was no real set time, and he understood that every mission was very important. Because Wang had no bicycle, they had to make this trek on foot to stay together. Tonight, unlike usual, Wang took the lead since he was the only one with a lantern. It acted kind of like a flashlight because of the glass opening at the front, but that did not do much to cut through the fog. Justin needed to keep telling him which roads to take and where to swap off onto new roads that weren't entirely visible, to which Wang would dismiss with, "Yeah, I knew that," or, "Right, just as Comrade Shi told me." All of this barking began to annoy Justin, but he did not want him to swing that spear at him, so he just shut up about it. While the first few kilometers of trail were relatively flat and easily accessible, they had to dismount the trail and cut left through the swampy areas of the forest to avoid bandits or soldiers. The sun had completely set by this point, and Justin was now thankful that Wang had brought his lantern. Still, the fog obscured the view of anything around them, and the dense grass did nothing to help them. Several times, Justin heard what sounded like 2 or 3 people marching around a few meters behind them. Wang also heard this, and they kept quiet as they made their way through. The patting of footsteps against the rocky ground was unnerving. It clearly sounded like several men marching all together alongside them at once, like they were being stalked by a party of soldiers in a line. They increased their pace. Wang decided to stop for a moment to look around just in front of a small ravine that sunk into a babbling stream. Justin noticed that when they stopped, the footsteps behind them marched around in circles for a moment. Then, he heard a shallow thump noise, like someone had just dropped an incredibly heavy bag. Wang signaled for Justin to go into the ravine. As he turned around to climb down, Wang directed his lantern toward the forest behind them. Ramrod still, Wang drew his breath and suddenly began yelling and pounding his chest at the brush. He pointed his spear and fell silent again. The two of them heard not just 2 or 4, but several legs stomp on the ground and prance backwards. They heard a large mass whip through the grass like wind, and all of a sudden, it was gone. Wang began laughing and loudly congratulating himself as they made their way downhill along the stream, but Justin knew better, because from behind them, he could still hear distant pattering. "Look, Justin, did you see that? Could you see? I'm like a real hero. There will be beautiful girls singing songs about me one day. You too, of course. We are real tiger hunters out here." Just as Wang was getting back on track down the ravine, the two of them spun around as a long, exaggerated moan came from the dense forest behind them. It sounded like an abnormally large tiger, and they could hear birds fluttering away from every tree that the sound touched. Grandfather recalls knowing immediately that it was not a tiger. It sounded like one, but gurgled and distorted. He could only compare them to the helicopters he had heard much later in his life in America, except with a bellowing roar underneath it, broken up by each gurgle. The roar trailed off into odd, high-pitched squealing notes, a bit like the whine of cicadas, but more concise and random. The same prattling sound pranced towards them, this time with multiple stomps, hitting the ground at a quicker interval. They heard it pouncing around the brush just above them, flanking their right side. Immediately, Justin pulled Wang and told him to run. They sprinted down the stream, all the while listening to the multitude of stomping that was keeping pace with them along their right flank just above them on what sounded like dozens of feet blasting into the dirt with each prance. Justin could hear low, loud panting coming from whatever was following them in tandem with each jump that it made, like a running ox. Eventually, they slid under a giant fallen tree, and the stream led off into a wide grove of flat greenery surrounding a large pond. Lotus flowers and water lilies bloomed out from the center of the grove, which Justin knew was not far from the next town. Wang panicked and spun around, and the two of them could see the silhouette of what looked like a tiger atop the fallen tree trunk, just a few meters away from them. At first, Wang shouted that it was a tiger, but then started shouting that it was a dragon. Its body was at least 3 times as long as any tiger they had seen, and it was moving on 3 or 4 pairs of long, muscular legs, which was followed by a long, undulating segment of its body, resembling a crocodile tail. The beast moved gracefully, almost like a fish, undulating up and down with every movement all the way to its tail. It seemed to stand head and shoulders above Wang, who was actually tall for his age. Its head was enormous, and it crept toward them with loud stomps. It let out the same long gurgling moan, except at a much higher pitch. Wang cried out and jabbed at it with his spear. Justin backed up, ready to sprint right around the grove and toward the main road. Wang was crying as the creature made tiny snaps at him, now fixated on his spear. Justin could see their silhouettes in the fog as the beast backed up into the water, crouched and ready to tackle him. Even from his position, it came up to Wang's waist. Justin then picked up a handful of mud and threw it at the long, strange creature. It stopped for a moment and shook its head around, groaning in an agitated way, and Wang jammed his spear towards its head. At this point, Justin spun around and began running around toward the road. A high-pitched screech filled the air, and Wang made a mad dash into the swampy water. He was clearly trying to swim, but the water was too low for that, and the roots of the vegetation and flowers were snagging on his legs. Justin came to the water's edge and reached out for Wang's hand. While he did this, he saw the large black mass dip headfirst into the water and then disappear. Wang almost reached Justin when he sunk very deep into the mud, to the point that his shoulders were peeking out of the water. He was crying and begging for Justin to pull him out. Justin was a small child though, and could hardly pull Wang against the weight of the water and the mud. Wang had nearly gotten his hips out of the water when, suddenly, Justin felt his hand yanked back violently from his grasp, and Wang was dragged back toward the water. He shrieked and cried, "Justin, please don't let him take me. Please, do something. Hurry, please." Wang was grabbing a small tree root and crying out, and the creature's maw was now visibly yanking at him horizontally from the water. Justin threw his bag back toward the tree line and grabbed the same root that Wang was grasping to. He began to pull it back, but Wang lost his grip and slid back into the water. Wang flailed around, and Justin saw the creature prance out toward him. Its enormous mouth crashed down on his lower back. Wang tried to scream, but it only came out as a gargled howling. Justin backed up, watching the thing gnash and roll as it dragged him deeper into the grove. He tried flailing away, but he was immediately dragged back under the surface of the water. Justin immediately spun around and dragged his bag with him away from the grove. When he got to the town, the professors commended him for his bravery. He tried to explain how Wang was attacked and eaten by some kind of monster, but the men were much too busy with their papers to give it any thought. The students working with the professors told him that he was making it up for more commendations. Some students supported him and said that it may have actually been a crocodile or a tiger, and that Justin was just delirious. He was, after all, a small child, and small children have big imaginations. The group inevitably lost interest when the professors demanded their attention. Justin stayed the night, and then was escorted back to his village with one of the local farmers on his rickshaw in the morning. Wang's family accused him of being a liar and of abandoning their son, but the local communist gangs defended him and shut the family up. The story was quickly hushed and forgotten within the following months. Hello Anons, I am from China, and I have a story not told anywhere here. That's because it happened to me, and only I know it. This happened to me in 1995, or within a year of that. I was a medical student working in the Liaoning province. I was doing an internship that was really low pay, just to try and get through school and be a real doctor. It was something I had big passion for, and I wanted to save people. The internship was at a crematorium. It's a scary and dark and cold place to work, but it was the only place that would take me. Everywhere else had too many already, or did not want to pay anything and wanted free work. This place was not worth the pay. I had not been there long, and they made me do everything alone, and even do the tasks for 2 people. There was always a really bad smell down there. overpowering chemicals that made me feel sick. So the entire time I would do paperwork and check on things, I would feel fuzzy in my head. I think the worst part is when I had to use the incinerators. They were creaky, and even though I was trying to be a doctor, I was young, so the thought of touching dead bodies creeped me out. There were bad rumors about the place too, only they weren't really rumors. It was more of an open secret. The guy who runs the place was a very shady guy. He would get a lot of bribes to not do any paperwork and just cremate the bodies. I've heard that even the government liked him and let this happen. He would report to the government and they would say okay or no, and that they would sometimes ask him for favors. The government part I'm not sure if true, but the bribe part is definitely true, and I had seen it. This was part of why I was able to get an internship here. Not a lot of people wanted to be involved. One night I won't ever forget. This night, a van comes up to the crematorium. It wasn't on a list, and the boss did not tell me it was coming. He has 3 patients with him in body bags. He tells me he okayed it with my boss. He was nervous, I could tell, and started telling me too much information that I didn't need or want to know. He told me it was a work freak accident, and that they were employees crushed under some metal at a refinery, and that if it got out, he would be shut down, and his family would starve. I stopped him while he was talking and just said, "Boss says it's okay, I don't ask." I took them off of his hands and had wheeled them in. I don't want to bore you with details of prepping them and everything. I got 2 done in a good time, but was getting tired, so I sat down for a few minutes. My nose was burning from all the smells. I still had 1 body left, and it was sitting on a gurney with the bag half unzipped, which meant the head and part of the neck was visible, but that is it. I am just reading a newspaper when I start to hear something. I hear metal clanking against the floor, and I look over and I see something horrifying. I see the gurney shaking. It looks like the dead body is spasming. Dead bodies do that because of, I think you call it, electrical impulse, but this was too much. It was full shaking. I sat there with my paper and stared in shock. I could not move, but it stopped very quickly. But before I could go back to reading, I saw the eyes shoot open. And then I saw the body sit up, ever so slowly. It sat up but didn't move. It just stared straight forward at the door. It twitched a little bit again, like when it was lying down, and then its head dropped back down to the gurney. It was lying down again, with its eyes closed again. I was so scared I called my boss, even though he would be angry with me. He just told me not to worry. He said new chemicals that we use make the bodies move sometimes. He said I was new and scared, so I probably imagined it being worse than it was. He said to make sure I finished very quickly before the chemicals stopped working. I did as I was told as soon as I got off the phone. I kept my head far away as I did everything because I was scared the eyes would open and I would be dead. I did the internship for a few more months after that until I got somewhere better and I got further in my career. We had more bribes when I was there, but they never did that again. They were all just from people who said employees died at work and they had to cover it up. I think the boss lied about the chemicals, but I don't know what else it could have been. In the summer of 2008, I went on an exchange program with a student ambassador program to China. I had just turned 17 and was with about 50 other kids from Wisconsin and Ohio. It was really my first time being away from home and without any other relatives. The trip lasted 2.5 weeks, and the group toured Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, and Hong Kong. It was a life-changing experience and fun. However, there were several things that happened while I was there. Some things that I couldn't really explain. Here are some of them. The first thing that happened was probably, in my mind, the most frightening to me. The group was in Xi'an actually. During our stay in Xi'an, we stayed overnight in a smaller village. We stayed in a hotel though for one of the days, but I forgot what the smaller village was called. Anyways, we were at this hotel and we basically had 1 floor to ourselves. There were 2 or 3 roommates in each room. We checked into the hotel and we were all getting set in our room. We were instructed to meet in the hotel restaurant at a certain time, which was about an hour after we were getting our things set in our room. I remember at one point leaving the hotel floor with someone for something. other than coming back upstairs to our floor. There were some people in the hall and others in the room. The person I was rooming with was in someone else's room at the time, and I walked back into the hotel room. I remember sitting in there by myself, listening to the others walking in the hall and sort of just organizing my bags. I also remember noticing that the room clock was not the correct time, so I had to check my cell phone to get the real time. I had my phone mostly turned off the entire trip because I made a stupid move and left my charger at home in Wisconsin. After what I thought to be only several minutes, the noise of people seemed to settle down, and I thought maybe they were all getting ready for dinner. I continued to sit in my room, and after another few minutes I thought that the halls were maybe just too quiet. I did not think that it was that late though, and that it was that close to dinner, so I just sat there again. Then I heard as if someone ran down the hall. It sounded to me like it came from the direction of the elevators and went down the hall. I instantly thought that it was just someone from the group having fun because I heard the movement in the hall again. It sounded like it was at my end of the hall. I got up because the sound went away, and I took that as the person possibly left downstairs. I basically thought I should head down to dinner, and with that, I left my room. As I walked, I thought I heard what sounded to be someone about to leave the room. It was like a doorknob was turning, and I heard some movement behind me. I remember sort of looking back to the empty hall, but I did not think much about it. I went to the floor where the restaurant was on, and the group leaders were standing there. They caught sight of me and kind of laughed, and told me I was late for dinner. I remember being confused and not thinking that I was late, but I saw that all of the students in the group were already seated. I had to sit with the leaders that night for dinner, and they told me that they were wondering who was missing, but they could not really decipher who it was. They stated I was gone for about 10 minutes. I just remember sitting there and thinking who was in the hall and in that room then. I even told them at dinner that I didn't think I was that late because I heard what sounded like people still in the rooms and in the hall when I was on my way down the elevator. They just looked at me somewhat amused and in wonder about what I was talking about. They didn't really press me any further on my statements, and we just went on with dinner. I'm pretty sure no employees were in the hall because the hotel was pretty vacant when we were there. I probably saw about 5 employees downstairs when coming in, and throughout our first few hours there, and I'm pretty sure that no one would just go into someone's room like that. Another thing that happened was during our homestay portion of the trip. About 4 people were assigned to a family in a small village outside either Xi'an or Shanghai, and at each homestay I was assigned with 3 other girls in the group, and we were taken to the house that we would be staying at, which would only be for about 2 days. I shared a room with a girl named Millie for the duration of the homestay. The room was a good size, and there were 2 full-size beds in it. On our first night, I was lying there. At some point I dozed off but woke up again. I just continued to lay there, trying to sleep again, but after a few seconds, I heard what sounded like heavy, silent breathing. I thought that it was Millie, but I realized it sounded like it was coming from behind me. At first, it didn't scare me, because I thought maybe it was the AC kicking in, but it went away after I turned my head to look at the AC. I laid there again, and brought the covers closer to me, and then it felt as though during this, like someone was pressing onto the end of the bed. Millie's bed was pretty much less than 5 feet away from mine, and I could see her while this was happening, so it wasn't her. I just laid there, and tried to just let the feeling pass, but it felt like it stayed there. I did not want to look at the end, but I could not help myself. But no one was there, nothing, it was just blank. I had a hard time getting to bed that night. I think maybe it was due to the constant traveling though. But after an hour or so after the bed and breathing incident, the room got really dark, and I just pulled the covers over my head. There was another incident that happened in the house, and it was when I was upstairs alone. The 3 other girls were downstairs, and I had run back upstairs for something. I should note that the 4 of us had the 2nd floor to ourselves, and we stayed in the 2 rooms upstairs. I was digging in my suitcase for whatever it was I needed, and remember hearing what sounded like someone being on the 2nd floor. There was sort of a sitting area upstairs with a table, then the 2 rooms and a bathroom. The noise sounded like it was coming from the sitting area, and I thought maybe the family's son was upstairs. They had a 5-year-old son. I started to walk to the door, since I thought maybe the son was playing with one of the toys that I saw upstairs, but no one was there. I walked downstairs, and the girls and the mom of the family were there, and maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, her son came in with two friends. Probably the final thing to happen while in China was during our last portion of the trip. We were in Hong Kong for the last 2 days of the trip, and we were at the Kimberley Hotel. My roommate there was a girl named Mariah. At one point in the first night, I went to take a shower. Mariah had left some time beforehand, and I was in the bathroom. While showering, I heard someone talking in the room, and at some point, the voice came to the door of the bathroom. I quickly thought that Mariah and someone else had came back to the room, so I didn't think much of it. I got out, and while drying off and whatnot, I heard the talking again, but it sounded quieter. I opened the door to the room, and the room was empty. The first thing that came to mind was that maybe they left, but I would have heard the door open and close, since the room door was right next to the bathroom. Then I thought it was the leaders doing their nightly room checks, but it was far too early for that. I sat on my bed, and soon Mariah came back, and sometime later, the leaders came to do their room checks. I had asked her while we were watching some TV show if she came into the room at all. She, of course, shook her head, no, and stated that she went with a few other people to walk around a part of Hong Kong with. And no, the TV was not on. We didn't really watch TV. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the stories. The goal for the channel is 100k, so please subscribe, like, and leave a comment because it really helps the channel. Thank you for watching.